I get asked all the time how I take such nice photos and get compliments about my staging, which kind of makes me laugh in a way because I am no interior designer, and I'm sure some of the things that I do and did in the past are quite questionable. But there is no mistaking that my more recent pictures are leaps and bounds better than the ones I started with. So what did I start with? Well, let's have a scroll through my Instagram feed and have a look at some of my very first flips, or flops as the case may be. You guys can be the judge of that. My name is Angie and I refinish furniture. Sometimes I paint and sometimes I don't, but I always do what I can to save old pieces from the trash. Welcome to my workroom. I used to have a physical store where I sold a lot of vintage decor, and I really miss that, so every now and then I like to go through my feed. This is the beginning of my Instagram feed. Now, these aren't my first flips, these are just the first ones that I added to Instagram when I joined up. Some of these pieces are really cool, but there are some issues with the lighting and some of the staging items I chose to use, even the wall color, which you'll see. I just really wanted to show you what a difference a couple of years can make. Just so you guys know, some of these pictures are old and they were on a less than ideal camera phone technology, so it's interesting to watch the progression as I upgraded over the years as well. This coffee table is the very first piece of furniture I flipped solely as a means of profit. I think I was going for kind of a farmhouse vibe. There's some antiquing wax on there, and yeah, it was okay. It was exciting to sell my first piece. Looking at the actual staging though, the books and the mug, those things are okay. It's something you typically find on a coffee table. This vase with the burlap and fake daisies that look like they came from the dollar store, they probably did. Those are going to make an appearance a few times and I'm almost embarrassed about it now, but we learn as we go. That's kind of the whole point of this video. This teal wall color, on the other hand, does no favors for the gray top on that coffee table, and it's almost a little bit cringeworthy. This little table was the second piece that I did and I was super excited about it at the time. I loved how it turned out. A lot of my first pieces were sort of farmhouse inspired, and I was watching a lot of Jamie Ray Vintage at the time on YouTube, and that was just kind of how I was learning. What's kind of interesting though is even if I did the same piece today in the same colors, the wood parts themselves would look very different, and if you're familiar with my channel, you know that I still paint some, but I do more restoration than anything, and yeah, I feel like the wood would look very different were I to do this piece today. Oh, and yeah, there's that burlap vase again. You might want to sit down for this next one. This was me being very creative in the beginning, and yeah, I'm not really sure what I was thinking. This was that typical vintage laminate product. The spindles were actually wood, but the shelves on the top it was almost melamine-like, and so yeah, it had to be painted. Did it have to be painted like this? Probably not, but you know the lady who bought it absolutely loved it, so that was encouraging. So putting the actual style of the piece aside, the photo isn't terrible, at least it's straight on, and that's something a lot of beginners struggle with. But again, that teal wall was not doing any favors for this piece or the next one. It was the only wall I had available in my space at the time, so I did what I had to do. This little shelf was number 4, and I really liked this one. I liked how the wood turned out. It was definitely not an expensive type of wood, but I kind of liked the rustic look to it. My staging was still a little, I don't know, I just kind of grabbed whatever was around that I thought sort of went with the pieces. Then I started watching a lot of different YouTubers and online classes about staging furniture and how important a white wall was. So as you can see here, this wall looks peach, even though it's white. And here I am again with that weird black and gray top. I did a few pieces that way and thankfully left that in the past. The reason this lighting looks so terrible is because I had fluorescent lights overhead with a warm tone, and that was a recipe for disaster. So another thing I learned is that art above a piece can really help stage it and help people picture it more in their own spaces, rather than having it just against a flat wall. My choices, however, weren't the best initially, and I moved up from the burlap vase to grass in a jar. At this point, this was probably flip number maybe 10 to 15, somewhere in there. The lighting was killing me, the fact that I couldn't get an accurate representation of the colors, so I made a change. I quickly realized that the color of the light was really affecting the color of the pieces, so I switched out those warm bulbs for daylight bulbs, and it made a huge difference. As you can see here, my staging was still absolutely terrible, but as I mentioned, it's a learning process, and that's why I wanted to show you this video. As time went on, I kept learning more and more about how to take decent pictures and pictures that are different, interesting angles, close-ups that show all the details. These were actually the first pictures that I was fairly proud of at the time. By this point, it's been almost a year and I've moved out of the main room at my space. I was only selling pieces online still, but this is the point where I decided that I have all this space at my other business. I may as well make the front end into sort of a little vintage shop. So I saved one approximately 10-foot wall, painted it bright white, which would be my new staging wall. The rest of the room, which was that teal color, was also repainted. I love this photo of this piece, but the photo I took with the doors closed was terrible because you could see all the patched holes in the teal paint before I repainted the opposite wall. It's definitely important to consider things like reflections in glass and mirrors especially. I've toned down some of that sort of craziness that I was doing in the beginning with my styles. And it's because, over time you learn more about what you like and what you're good at, and even just being able to apply products better. You get better at paint techniques and sealing wood flawlessly, and even though my work is still quite eclectic, like I do everything from farmhouse to mid-century, you can tell now looking at a photograph that that is my piece. There's just something about it that says that is a Transcend Furniture Gallery piece and it stands out. Things definitely get trickier when you're staging in your own home. Not everyone has a 10-foot wall that they can just set aside for staging, I realize that. But there are some things you can do to take better pictures, even if it's in a small space. And one of those things is to make sure you take good, straight photos. I often see on Marketplace pictures that are lopsided and the perspective is off. If you have to lay down on the floor or get into some crazy yoga pose to take a straight-on picture, it's worth the effort, believe me. But another thing you can do is just try to clear out any of the personal stuff that you have in the shot, like family photographs and clutter like pet dishes or papers, cups. The whole point of staging your pictures, taking the time to do it properly, is so that the prospective buyer can picture the piece in their own home. And if you've got tons of personal items floating around in that picture, it becomes harder for that person to separate your house from their house and picture it in their own space. Do you know what I'm saying? So fast forward a couple of years, we had a huge provincial lockdown in 2020 mid-pandemic, and sadly I opted to close my little storefront. Most of my furniture sales were online anyway, so this wasn't a huge deal, but it was still, quite a blow. But onward and upward, we ended up buying a new place where I could work from home, and one of those perks was this garage. I really wanted a full brick wall, but I couldn't find any of paper in time, so I went with this sort of neutral gray white shiplap instead, and it worked okay. For that time period, it actually did a great job, and it didn't seem to matter if I was doing something that's a little bit farmy or kind of rustic, or if I'm doing very rich, warm wood grains like these pieces here, or something mid-century, because it was still neutral enough. I have fluorescent lighting in the garage, and as soon as we moved in, I switched all of my bulbs out to true daylight bulbs. So none of this is auxiliary lighting. This is just the lighting that is in the garage. I'm just fortunate that it is placed in such a way that it accentuates whatever I put on this wall and doesn't fight with it. You may have noticed also throughout the course of this video that the quality of the photos themselves have improved. These recent pictures were taken with my newest iPhone at the time, which was the iPhone 12 Pro. Let me tell you, that thing had an amazing camera, but truthfully, it doesn't matter what camera you have. You could have a $2,000 camera, and if you don't know how to use the settings properly, you're still probably going to take terrible pictures. I started my YouTube channel in April 2021, and almost a year later, I gave my workroom a mega overhaul. I purchased used kitchen cabinets for storage and counter space. I had an epoxy floor installed, I added a partition wall, and my staging wall moved again. And now it's just a simple 10-foot stretch of wall, painted a slightly warm white. Again, the point of this video is just to show you that this is an evolution. I didn't start off in this big shiny workroom. I started off in the basement of a house with a half door. And throughout the years and just constantly trying to level up, this is now what I have to work with. Now, if we bravely look back toward those first few pictures, I think it's safe to assume that you're seeing what I'm seeing, in that there's no comparison between these old pictures and more recent photos. As we go along in this business, we figure out what we like, what we don't like, what we want to work on, and even though I don't do as many painted pieces now, I do still do them. Whether it's a painted piece or a wood piece that I'm showing off, I'm doing my best to take good photos in good lighting that is really going to show the piece at its best. This also really shows how someone's style can change as they go along, and you sort of refine yourself and learn what you enjoy doing the most and what you're best at, and also how important the temperature of a light bulb can be. I hope you enjoyed this little before and after compare and contrast video. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I will see you in the next video.